All right, we are here with the follow-up podcast where we talk about the sermon of the previous week and everything else. If you have questions for us, send them in right after the sermon. We'll try to work them in or get back to you in some way, shape, or form. But here's where we talk about whatever we talked about.
Yeah, I had a question actually.
Already.
Are people able to submit just any question, or are we trying to keep it related?
I think we have to, for sake of time, we have to keep it somewhat related,
in the circle.
But there's a general question. I'd imagine if you wanted to ask something from just your own personal study or something like that, then by all means, send it in one way or another.
Yeah. Okay. Well, then I won't drop the reference of a random question that came in. Then, so yeah. We'll keep our secrets.
All right. Random questions.
They know who they are, though.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, it was quite a good Sunday. A lot of people, and
the summer crowd is back. Officially.
Yeah.
Yes.
There's some folks, when you see them, you know summer is here, and they showed up. So it was really good to see some of those folks in the building as well.
Yep. It was a good day. It was Father's Day, so I had some other things going on. We went across town to hang out with my parents.
You did.
And share spicy pickles and all that kind of stuff. So yeah.
Fantastic. Yeah, it's good to spend time with family. I had a good Father's Day. I wore one of my Father's Day shirts. My family gives me Father's Day shirts all the time.
Okay. Like corny ones or?
Oh, very corny.
Okay,
yeah.
perfect.
So they're only like legitimate to wear on Father's Day.
Okay.
That's just what's going on and everything.
So you got to get them in on the day of.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. But you preached. It was your week.
Yep.
So I'm going to come at you with some of the questions that come to mind as I go through the passage, and I understand you even have questions for yourself.
Well, yeah. Some questions that as you're reading along, you just left wrestling with them. You can't unpack everything in the pulpit, and then also you sometimes can't answer everything either.
Well, yeah, there's only so much time.
Yep.
To get through it.
So there's just a few things that hang around.
You landed with an interesting passage. You called it the miscellaneous.
The miscellaneous, yes. Yeah. So like, as you're studying into this, you read these laws. They're all a little bit disconnected, kind of. They seem kind of random,
Yeah.
Laws about different worship practices, laws about how you treat people, laws about even like small habits like what you eat. Like all of these things are like stuck in there, and what brings them together was the big question to answer.
I have to take some responsibility for that landing on you, because to kind of map out passages for each week, and as we plan out the series, so that landed on your bailiwick. But I saw kind of a general cohesion around man relating to God.
Yeah.
And particularly in the context of being a priesthood, a people who are a priesthood nation.
Yes.
Nation of priests. That's
where it's not as miscellaneous as it first seems, is when you see this idea of consecration that ties all that together. This is what it means to be consecrated to God as His people who are set apart to Him. And so that's really what actually ties them together.
Okay.
Yeah, I think.
No, I agree. That is kind of the general theme of it. So when you look at it through that lens, you're looking at it. You're looking at each of those laws through that lens. It's not generally. So it's not the starting point for how God relates to everybody in the world. So say a missionary walks into a remote tribe, right? Okay, haven't heard of God's laws, haven't lived in His context for 400 years, all those kinds of things. God begins interfacing with your life. He knocks on the door that is most needed at that moment for your welfare, and then expands into other areas.
Yeah, you've got me thinking of the book of Romans. You get into chapter 1. How are these people standing before God without the law? Chapter 2, what if they do have the law? How are they standing before God then? And then by the time you get to chapter 3, Paul is really unloading the idea that we're actually all justified by faith only, you know.
Sure.
And so whether you had the law or you didn't have the law,
Right.
you're standing before God.
Well, and even those who had no knowledge, they still aren't without excuse because nature speaks.
Yep.
And that kind of thing. But so for those who are just cluing in, the sermon that he preached came from Exodus 22, verses
18 through 31.
Yes, 18 through 31. So it's got kind of a mixed bag of things that are in there, but really they all kind of apply to that general concept of man's relationship to God. One thing that stood out to me is right off the bat, the first few verses, the first few laws, is the severity with which going after other gods is punishable.
Yeah.
And doing practices that are in worship of other gods. So we have in 18, we have, 22.
No, 18 definitely. The
sorcery.
Yeah.
19, lying with animals. 20, sacrifices to other gods. Devoted to destruction, put to death, not live. Those things going along with that. So why the severity? In your interpretation.
Yeah, and this gets into like a lot of application as well, as far as like how do we view capital punishment and all those those issues. But as far as the severity of it, God is holy. He holds a position that nobody else shares in terms of he doesn't share his divine status, nature, and so to what would you say, to share that with someone else, that's not possible. And so the idea that someone will be worshiping something else is highly offensive to the exclusive nature of the God who is the greatest as far as on top there. But then the severity itself to our modern ears, of course, is like, well, what's the big deal? Because we have freedom of religion in our country, right?
Yeah.
The idea, so this like butts up against our personal, even our culture, our government, the way it's built into our whole laws. And so you read a passage like this and you think to yourself, really, is this what we should implement? Should institute? Should we tolerate other religions?
Yeah.
And
this is a theocracy.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, and so that becomes the question: is like how this it gets bigger. Like, how do you implement God's law as a Christian anyway?
Okay,
it becomes like the bigger, broader question. So, the severity of it, I think, it boils down to simply this, which is that all sin is serious and brings forth death, whether it's this or another.
Yeah,
that there's this overarching through the Bible, no matter where you are, that sin has a consequence that eventually leads to death, and in this case, it's showing up right off the bat. As far as just it's exposing like how serious sin is, how severe the curse actually is of sin.
So one thing that and I really apologize for my chair squeaking here. He fixed his chair with a screwdriver before, and mine I did not get fixed, so it's going to squeak.
Maybe we'll get that. How it's going to be.
We'll get that worked out by next week. Anyhow, but no, the concept of God prescribing death for certain actions, and the concept of dying, and you mentioned capital punishment.
Yeah.
The theory of capital punishment, where it's still practiced and where it was practiced throughout American history in the early parts, was the idea of we have taken this as far as we can in our judgment. And we're turning you, by putting you to death, we're putting you into judgment before God. So we have adjudicated the situation beyond a shadow of a doubt. So we have no doubt. The highest punishment that we can do is death, or to just end your interaction with this world and put you before the divine judge who is in charge of everything. So. And when you look at God accepting the responsibility for the final outcome in that person's, eternity and soul and all that kind of stuff, it changes the view of that death penalty being applied. Put it this way: I heard an illustration a long time ago of you walk into a room and there's a man and his son, you're on a second story, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you see an open window. The man takes his son and chucks him out the window. What do you think at that moment? You go, how horrible that a man would chuck his son out a window, because you're on the second story.
Okay.
You know, there's all kinds of things. But you look closer at the situation, you find out that there was a huge snowdrift. It had come up to the bottom of the.
You didn't see the whole picture. Okay.
You didn't see the whole picture, right?
Okay.
And yet but the father knew that about this activity. I had this actually happen when we went camping once.
Oh, seriously?
Yeah.
Like over the edge into a lake or something?
Lake.
Okay.
Right. Yeah, lake. So little Solomon, he's a big guy now. I couldn't do this, but when he was really young, he really enjoyed being thrown. He had a life vest,
life jacket, right? Yeah.
But he enjoyed being thrown into the lake, right?
Okay. Yeah.
So we had done this before, but then the next day came, and there were some ladies sitting over here, and so Solomon comes up and he goes, Dad, and I just took him, I just chucked him out of there, and the
Everyone's
ladies
like horrified.
They're like, oh. And then he gets out, comes around, and says, again.
Yeah. Of course. Yeah, I have that same problem.
Right. And so there's a different perspective when you know that the person taking the action knows the outcome, and God knows the outcome. When he says, put these people to death, he's saying, for these specific things in the context of being a priesthood nation and being in direct interface with him, he's saying, send them to me. That's my impression. So
yeah, and there is definitely there's a distinction in this passage between places where God is committing like that kind of a judgment to his earthly rulers and leaders, and then there's a couple places where God says, I'm going to personally take up the sword in this case and render judgment directly, where God's the one actually executing the judgment himself.
That's a little further down.
And so when you speak of those situations as far as someone making judgment without having all of the information and all the pieces, but then God, he's there, he's got all the information, he's got, he knows everything. So when he renders a judgment, it's perfectly just.
Right.
Where people tend to, what would you say, balk at the idea of a capital punishment is the fact that human judgment isn't perfect.
Exactly.
But they're making a semi-permanent decision as far as when somebody dies for a crime. Like even in the last, and these don't always sit well with us, even in the last, 30, 40 years, we could come up with some examples of some capital punishment situations where people died wrongfully. I mean, even like the first thing you think of, and this goes back in history, the first thing you think of when you read about don't permit a sorceress to live, the first thing that comes to my mind is witch hunt.
Right, yeah.
And so like how do we wrestle with the idea of a capital punishment, and then some of the places where that goes wrong, where human judgment isn't perfect and people do suffer. I think that's this shows up in how we relate to the law as Christians. So if you're going to relate to the law as I'm going to go ahead and implement and enforce all God's standards of righteousness, and this is how we're going to run. Suppose you become king today or president or whatever, and you're like, I'm just going to put all these in place. Like you've now bought yourself one thing in each hand. You've got the blessings that come with the law, right? Yeah. But then you also have all the curses that come with it too.
Right, yeah.
This is a double-edged
It's not
thing.
A pick or choose.
Right.
You have to, I like that you bring that out, because this is a whole package, and it's dropped into a culture and a place and a time, and it has a future fulfillment, so dietary laws and things like that eventually get fulfilled, and so it changes there, but there is a need for these things in this time, because it was the world was so messed up. God had chosen Israel, chosen it out to be an ark, if you will, a thing that floats above the darkness and carries truth to when it could be then fulfilled and disseminated across the world.
Sure. I don't want people to misunderstand either, because earlier you kind of referred to the idea of sending someone to God who's the judge, which while that is an aspect of, God and his nature and even the role of capital punishment and everything back there, we don't want to, like, in our own lives, we don't want to take the tack of well, just, send him to God and let him sort him out.
No. you are charged with doing justice. You're
Right.
charged with even applying mercy. That's even a part of the charge. And I want to talk about that a little bit later.
Sure.
The balance of mercy versus the justice things, and how does that play out? But yeah, it isn't a shoot now and ask questions later.
Right.
God will sort it out.
Yeah, we could come up with all the old Western quotes for this, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah, like what is it? Judged by 12, carried by 6, and all of that whole thing.
Oh, I'm not familiar with
you
that.
You never heard
colloquialism.
that? It's better to be judged by 12 than carried by 6. Like if you're in a gunfight, let the jury sort it out instead of get buried.
Is that something that people say?
I don't know.
Oh,
it's like an Old West thing.
Old West thing. Yeah. Right. I like the Gary Larson cartoon Far Side. I love the Far Side.
Okay.
So it's got the old cowboy standing over a body going, "Who's the 16th president of the United States? What's the capital of Minnesota?"
Oh yeah. Okay.
And then somebody in the background says, "Roy, you can't shoot first and ask questions later."
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. So that's not what this text is calling for. Any of that kind of crazy stuff. Yeah.
Oh yeah. All right. So then, let's see. We're the part about the sojourner and the widow and the orphan mentioned there, and that's followed with saying, "I will hear their cry."
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Help me understand that in the context of a world in which many sojourners, widows, and orphans are being abused and killed. Like we were talking this morning about Nigeria. Yeah,
true.
If you don't know, thousands of Christians are being slaughtered in Nigeria right now. Over the years, it's probably in the hundreds of thousands, if not, something like it's a large number, and we're just hearing reports every day of Islamic factions coming in, burning whole congregations inside their churches, and many atrocities. We're not hearing about.
And this is only what makes the news, too.
Right,
These are the ones that make the news. It happens
backwoods. You're not going to even know about. And then you got like Syria. There's literally millions of people who are displaced and starving and all that in their country as well. I mean, things like that. How do we look at this and say God hears all those things, and yet it doesn't seem to change for the people who are
this
in that
is
situation?
one of my questions that I wrote down too. Was how do we deal with the Bible shows us we've got an all-powerful God.
Yeah.
He knows everything.
Right.
He's also good. He's compassionate. He hears the prayers of the poor and those in this text that are suffering. And then how come there's still suffering going on in the world becomes the big question. And this is kind of a classic presentation of the problem of evil. How do we deal with the fact that we've got an all-powerful God, he's good, and then we still have evil and suffering in the world. And like this, and there's not, what do you say? I'm not going to solve the question of the ages in 10 minutes or something, but there is kind of a simple way of considering this, which is that we are in the middle of the story.
Okay.
We're in the middle of the story. The curse is back here, redemption is in progress. So there's a sense where we're not at the end yet. We don't see the end from the beginning of all those situations. So yes, God is in the process of bringing about justice and goodness. And
so it's not a one-to-one,
Right.
Someone takes advantage of me, harms me if I'm a sojourner, widow, orphans, one of those classes. And then 10 minutes later, zot, there's just a puddle of oil on the ground.
Yep.
Okay.
So the idea...
Well, the reason for that is that there is an allowance for that person to turn.
True. There's a window of repentance.
Okay.
So this is where the severity meets, the severity of the sin problem meets right up against this whole problem of suffering we're in. The fact that we're in the middle of the story and not at the end yet.
Okay.
Is the problem of suffering, the problem of evil is ongoing as a result of sin. But remember back to the beginning of this text where sin is serious enough to warrant things like the death penalty.
Yeah.
So it's really serious. It affects people. It hurts a lot of people. Some people die as a result of sin, people killing each other and fighting and all that. But then in the middle of the story, God has this window of, like you mentioned, repentance. If God were to strictly enforce his righteous standards instantaneously, we wouldn't be here having this conversation. We would all die. Like there's a sense where his righteous standard is so perfect, just, holy, we can't stand before him on our own. It's because there's this window of time where things are playing out that we are able to come to trust Christ, that it's a window of mercy. And in that mercy, some people are using it, for good. Some people are using it for bad.
Yeah.
There's an element of human choice that's in there too. God's given us an opportunity to make a choice.
So we actually saw part of that earlier in Exodus, where Israel is facing towards the land, going to come into the land. Maybe it's not there. I'm forgetting where it is, where it says that the sin of the people of the land is not complete.
Well, that might go all the way back to the patriarchs. Did that phrase go way back to Abraham?
I think it goes back to Abraham.
Yeah. God made that statement to Abraham that this is going to happen. Your people are going to be enslaved.
Sure.
And then they're going to come into the land. Okay. And this like mysterious phrase that God uses, because the sin of the Amorites isn't full yet, and you're like, right. What's that?
And why does sin have to be full?
Right.
I think that there's a larger context of there's individual judgment for how you behave, interact, do, and then there's whole civilizations or cultures. Cultures deteriorate. Many people have looked at American culture and say it's deteriorating and has deteriorated. To the point where we don't even know which way is up, kind of scenario.
Yeah, morality.
And so, but God allows that, and I think it becomes a cautionary tale to all the other societies, and they're going, maybe we should change our course. Look how bad it's going for them. Or if we're going to start something new or rebirth, we can learn from history. And I think there's individual demise that happens as a result of sin, and then there's societal there. So you have that in the case of the Amorites, and then here he has that in case of individuals.
Yeah,
he learned from that.
Well, individuals who are part of a group.
Sure,
they're God's consecrated people.
Well, you have the sojourners and the widows and orphans, but you also have those who are in a capacity to be able to abuse them in that way.
Sure, yeah.
Okay, cool. So I like you kind of covered the whole mercy side of there's mercy embedded in this very severe judgment.
There's a reason we're still in the middle of it.
Right.
There's a purpose that God has, and as the judge who can see everything.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Verse 28. I don't want to skip over any questions that you were going to introduce here.
No, you're good.
Okay, we're on it.
As long as you've got them, I'll go with them. Yeah.
All right. Verse 28 stuck out to me. It's down there towards the end. You shall not revile God nor curse the ruler of your people. It seems like God and rulers being equated in a way,
or used as like a parallelism kind of thing.
Yeah, it's a parallel.
This side of it and this side of it. Yeah.
What is the technical term? Is that syllogism?
That has
where you have things
terminology. I just call it parallelism.
Okay.
Whenever there's a two-sided statement that shows up in the Old Testament, I just call it a parallelism. That would be the wrong term.
But it works. It works. We'll go with it for now. Yeah. Maybe we can get out our theology books and look at it.
Sure.
Whatever. I think there's a special term for it.
I believe you. It's in that book over here. No.
Okay. So, revile the ruler. Why is that? I know you talked about it a bit in your sermon.
Yeah.
Because you were talking about, you're talking about in God putting people in charge.
Right.
So we have that in like Romans
13.
13.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, you might be
Romans
right.
13.
Yeah.
Where it talks about, the ruler dictates this and all this, and you obey the ruler.
Right. You're submitting to the authorities of humans.
And even Jesus said you would not have authority if it hadn't been given to you to Pilate.
Yeah, he did. Yeah.
So I know that theme is there. How does that apply in America, where some people don't like the ruler?
Yeah. Well, and there's even other layers to that in America that's like unique to, you've got like the idea of democracy, like kind of
Republic.
Republic, yeah. But the similar concept of as far as people are able to vote for things, and move things and change things. Okay. So this gets really mixed in terms of our understanding compared to back then, and compared to, biblical times where typically you're going to have, in this nation, you're going to have, judges and that kind of a system, or priests and that kind of a system. And then you've got, further on, certain nations that have kings that are set up. We don't relate to that very well because we have a totally different government structure here.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of this is in the context of kings or at least tribes, tribal idea. They don't even have a king, right?
Right, not at this time.
These people, they don't have a king. They have a judge or leader. I guess that would be Moses.
They have the elders, and then they have Moses. And then when that shifts, it's going to be Joshua.
And Moses has created, he did this earlier where his father-in-law came in and created this kind of tiered system that goes down to families.
Yeah, in chapter 18.
I think so.
18, yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
So speak to honoring a ruler in the context of to whom it was written, and then how do we see that today?
Yeah, sure. So back then, it was God had appointed people almost directly to lead his people, as far as he calls Moses from where he is and says, I'm going to use you to lead these people out of Egypt. So there's that sense where God is using human rulers to move in the world. And it's not just Israel, it's other nations too. You look at earlier in this book, Pharaoh, this is the reason why I put you here, was that I would get glory over all the nations when you're, during the whole 10 plagues incident and everything with coming out of Egypt. So there's this idea that God is the one who sets the trajectory for nations, who establishes the rulers of those nations, who gives them the responsibility to carry out a certain purpose with those nations. And this goes all the way back. This goes back into Genesis. We've been studying that through men's Bible study and looking at the nations and how they're starting to set up, early in that book. And those nations there's key individuals that are being, put into place there, or that are rising to power.
Like the Tower of Babel and the different family groups that are spreading out.
And the commissions that are given in those cases, go, spread out over the earth, multiply, all these things. And they're trying to, sometimes they rebel against that, like you bring in the Tower of Babel, and they're like, we're just going to stay here, we're going to build a tower.
In contradiction,
In contradiction, So the concept that God is sovereign over the nations, it is not just a political battle necessarily. It is also a spiritual battle or a religious battle. In a way, the old nations back then understood. Some of them had their own gods, and so this wasn't just a contest of nations. It's also a contest of gods. And when God rises above all the other nations, I'm not just another god among the nations. I'm the God over everything.
Sure.
Then we see his sovereignty really. I guess rising in full force in the text.
Well, the interaction in Egypt.
Yeah.
It's kind of interesting. I mean, God is demonstrating that he is over Pharaoh, that he is over the gods of Egypt and such, and yet he has Moses go and ask to leave.
Yeah, true. Isn't that interesting?
Some of my people go that we may sacrifice in the wilderness and come back. And that interaction gets used and used and used to the point where Pharaoh says, "Get out! I want you out of here." Because and so now the ultimate purpose of what God wanted and what was doing is now, and then he tried to reclaim it, but he couldn't. Red Sea, so forth.
Right.
But there's still a respect for his authority as king, his place as king, even in that interaction.
That is interesting. I actually never picked up on that.
I always wonder why does Moses come and ask, let's go out into the wilderness to sacrifice?
It's almost like God's playing a chess game, and he's like, I could get this checkmate in 3 moves, or I can get it in 20 moves. It doesn't matter how many moves. Sure. I'm going to checkmate you eventually.
He's on a whole different level. Okay.
Or 10 moves, since it's 10 plagues.
Yeah. So then, how do we not revile the ruler? Well, first of all, I mean, we're talking about us.
Yeah.
Who is the ruler?
Well, ultimately, it's God.
True.
So back to this, like, but I mean, you're honoring earthly rulers because of your honor for God.
Yes.
And God's sovereignty over the situation.
Okay.
But yeah, with America, who's the ruler? Like, United States of America, who is our ruler? That is a very mixed up question. Because of the way our government is structured.
Yeah.
We've got this, 3 branches of government. You got your executive branch, your legislative branch, your judicial branch, if I could say that 10 times fast. And the idea of having one single ruler is totally foreign to us.
Yeah.
We don't really have that. Immediately to people's minds, they think, the president, because he's the one who's on the camera the most, or whatever.
Uh-huh.
But there's such a balance of powers in this nation that if you were to look at not reviling God's ruler, you're looking at quite a big system. There's a ruler sense in which Supreme Court judges are making ruler type decisions.
So the highest of each branch. Yeah. You could see whoever is the final decision maker on a particular thing. I guess you might say is a rule, but even they are subject to the will of the people and elections and things like that.
Yeah, and this isn't to say that any rulers are above criticism or any authorities are above criticism either, because you've got this honor for the ruler, this honor for the one that God has set up over the people is tied to an honor for God. We see this concept play out all over the New Testament. You honor the authorities, the rulers, because you honor God. You honor even your parents because you honor God. There's this God.
You can have bad parents. Right. You can have bad rulers.
Right.
That's all.
So honor for God is tied to honor for authority, but that doesn't mean that every authority does is honorable.
True.
Sometimes it's not.
Yeah.
This is where the United States government's unique. We delegate a lot of power to the people. There are enough cases where even in our country it's weird to pick a ruler because the people are by the government, of the people, by the people, for the people kind of idea.
Yeah.
The people have such a big part of the government in our country that it's difficult for us to think of. There's a lot of examples where this comes out, right?
Okay.
So legislation, we vote sometimes to petition to change certain things within legislation. We have a little bit of authority delegated to ourselves by our government. That comes up in Romans 13 talks about the ruler doesn't bear the sword in vain or whatever. He has a responsibility to carry out justice and this kind of thing. Well, there's cases where our government delegates some of that responsibility to us too. They give us the right to bear arms and these kinds of things. So there's some governmental authority.
Well, there are even points at which we're calling for jury duty.
Right, and we have to help make a judgment. Yeah. Yes, yeah. Right. So that is a little bit trickier with our government for us to think of.
Yeah.
Who to honor and who not to honor.
Sure.
But it's still a case of honor to whom honor is due. It's still a case of we honor God, so we honor those that are in authority. But we also have to look at the prophets and see the times where sometimes authority needed to be warned that hey, you're on a crash course with a serious idolatry problem and it's going to hurt a lot of people.
Yeah.
Right. So there's plenty of cases where authority is not above criticism, but it's supposed to flow from an honor for God. So what's honoring to God in the way I interact with my government? That's really the key question for the Christian.
Yes.
Yep.
So I'm maintaining my honor for God. I'm maintaining my relationship with God, and then I've got to negotiate, honor the ruler as appointed by God, even though they may be doing things that A, are not in line with Scripture, or B, are not in line with my comfort.
Yeah.
What I would like to have happen.
Your liberties.
Right.
Yeah.
Because there may be times, there's times when God says, you're a wicked nation. You're going to have a wicked ruler who's going to come in and operate things in a way that you're not going to like. To dishonor, to not recognize the ruler that rises and the adverse way that they rule. If you just respond to them as, oh, there's that bad ruler, I'm gonna take him out. You see this you go back a few hundred years where you had assassinations,
not even 100 years.
No, yeah,
we could probably find it within 50 or so years.
Yeah, but that whole constantly fighting for the top spot kind of thing is not looking at the situation from the view that sometimes a bad ruler is not just a bad ruler, they're a punishment for the people, and if they turn to God and back a godly ruler, someone who will operate in terms of justice and mercy, balance, but also not bearing the sword in vain, then it wouldn't be just the next strong guy who can manage to get in there. Because if you don't learn your lesson, it gets worse. I guess that's what it seems to be in nations where they go, this guy is stronger than that guy, I'm going to back him. In Liberia, after the Civil War, they actually had some warlord run for president. And there were people who backed him for president, and his motto was, he killed my mother, he killed my father, I'm voting for him.
That's wild.
That was
because he was powerful enough to
do that.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
And so everybody was looking for who is the strong man.
Wow.
Who is the one who can be to totally decimate my enemies.
Yeah.
And so you get in that and there will always be people in the world ready and willing to take advantage of grudges, covetousness, selfishness, tribal think. I want people who look like me, who talk like me. I want all this stuff in my little box that favors me, rather than people who try to govern the whole group.
Okay, I got a couple thoughts related to earthly rulers, and some of our focus, I think, gets off a little bit. Like, who's president today? Well, I don't like that one, so I'm gonna, wait till we get a good one or something. And you think that way. Someone might think that way about a situation. Maybe if we just had a better ruler at the top, this would all go better. Okay, honoring rulers. One concept might help with honoring a ruler who's doing things that we disagree with is the idea of, I honor you for your position, but it would be a lot more honorable if you would do the right thing.
Sure.
It would be, so there's like this, that's kind of the criticism level is you would get more honor just simply by doing righteousness.
Right.
Doing the right thing. And so that is, I think that's where we don't lower our standards of righteousness in order to honor earthly rulers, but we would hope that things would get better, or we would want things to get better, and that's perfectly just. But this ties into something that Paul said in I think 1 Timothy, that everyone is to pray for everyone everywhere, that they would, and for kings even, he mentioned specifically for kings, for rulers, that we could live a godly, peaceable life, a quiet and peaceable life, and that the rulers would eventually comes down to that because God's merciful and would want everyone to be saved. And so the idea is we're to pray for the salvation even of rulers. So don't, in this idea of here's a good ruler, here's a bad ruler, and this one's just God's judgment for these people's misbehavior, and this one is God's blessing. Don't lose sight of the redemption fact of that God still asks us to pray for kings to be saved.
Yeah.
That God could still redeem them, even in all the corruption and wickedness that might be there.
So kings are people too.
There's hope. Yeah, the kings are people too. In the middle of this, there's mercy extended to them that we should pray for.
Okay.
We should pray for that.
Again, mercy shows up in a passage that seems very cut and dry, but
yes.
there is a lot of mercy based in there.
Yep. And then I wanted to preach the gospel here while we're here Amen. Too, which is, preach we get so focused on earthly leaders, earthly rulers. I want this guy to be president. I want this guy in the governor's office in Washington, or I want, whatever. You've got all this, you've got all these political hopes and dreams that we have. At the end of the day, Christ is going to come and triumph over all his enemies, over all the other rulers. He's called the King of Kings.
King of Kings.
Right. So there's this idea that we get into our minds. If we could just get a good ruler, then there would be righteousness and justice in the land. Like, there's not going to be that perfect scenario until Jesus is king. Yeah. And that starts in the heart with people, So it's really an appeal to, if you don't like who's sitting on the throne, then surrender to Christ and give him control, at least over your domain. Yeah. And watch that domain just build and spread.
Watch the kingdom of
heaven. The kingdom of heaven. Yes.
Fold out from you.
Yes. Okay. It's at hand. Reach out and grab it.
So the way to change a country and a nation is for its people to submit to Christ.
Seriously. Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
If every citizen in the country were to be a part of the kingdom of God, then if everyone, and in its truest and highest, I mean, we're talking heaven. We're talking the coming kingdom, because that's the end goal, is for God
our citizenship, Philippians, our citizenship isn't even here.
Yeah.
Like, we become citizens of a kingdom. There's going to be a new heaven, new earth that is perfectly righteous.
Absolutely.
So we're in the middle.
We're in the middle.
We're in the middle.
Yeah, we're in the in-between.
Yep. The law was given for people who are in the middle.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Fantastic. Yep. All right. I don't know how long we want to go on this.
I don't
know. I just had one question, kind of, unless you got more.
No, we're good.
The first fruits. You got first fruits of what grows.
Sure.
You got first fruits of your flesh. First fruits of your children is dedicated to God. First fruit, the firstborn is verse 29 of chapter 22. The firstborn of your sons you shall give to me. Then do the same with ox and sheep. 7 days, 8th day give it to me. That kind of thing. Yep. Why? Why the first fruits? Is it assumed the first fruits are better, or?
Well, now that's a good question. As far as agriculturally, I'm not too sure as far as how, if you're growing something, is the first thing that comes off that vine really the best thing that comes off the vine? I don't know if it's always true. It might, I guess my lack of knowledge in agriculture is showing.
But I think of first fruits as, because we had the feasts that we talked about.
Sure.
I think it was the first week of the where we were going into the laws, and so it's actually in verse 23 where it talks about the early and the later harvest.
Right, the two harvests with their system. Yeah.
So I would think the first fruits comes from that early harvest.
Okay.
And so I was talking to one of our members who's had a farming background.
Sure.
So there's what grows there and what does, and then the harvest that we think of, when we think of harvest time, we think of, pumpkins and late summer kind of things.
Right, fall.
Yeah. And I think of those as bigger and sweeter and all that. First fruits, or like early stuff, I don't know what to put in that category. But I do know, first animals, first of animals, first of people, you're talking about something that is, so the animal is younger, so the firstborn of an animal is going to be stronger.
Right.
With firstborn of family, that's a key part of that family
the inheritance system. Yeah. That's true.
So that being, when we're talking about people, we're talking about dedicated to God.
Right.
When we're talking about animals, we're talking about something that is sacrificed, is a part of the sacrificial system.
Sure.
There. And then, of course, fruits as well.
Yeah. Yeah, so I can think of actually an example in the Bible for where the first fruit thing does get tricky, and it's the idea of a first ripe fig. So in the Bible, sometimes you'll see this mentioned, the first ripe fig, and it's not really the best fig of the season. But it's again that kind of 2-stage growing cycle. The first ones aren't the best, but they're the sign that better is coming. They're like kind of the sign that there's going to be more after this or whatever. And so that idea shows up in the Old Testament. So I can think of at least that example as far as something that comes up first that's not necessarily better as far as crops goes. But then the idea with the animals and with the people, there's definitely a priority put on the firstborn in terms of, for animals, in terms of the quality. And then, for people, the firstborn, I mean, they're meant to carry on like the leadership of the family. Whoever's the firstborn or the oldest, patriarch, they're gonna lead the family. People are gonna live on, the land that firstborn is gonna inherit. There's the birthright concept that comes with that.
Oh, yeah.
So for God to ask for the firstborn to be dedicated to Him, that's like a really big ask in a family. You're saying, hey, the guy who's going to inherit all this, he's learning to lead this. He's going to be, the powerful one in our family. And then for God to ask for that to be given, that's a pretty serious.
Well, He's asking for it to be given. I know. Originally, that concept was cemented there, or not cemented, was proposed there, and then God created a redemptive system whereby the tribe of Levi would be the ones dedicated to the temple and do that, and so, but the members of other tribes would come and redeem the firstborn. But there would always be that knowledge that they were redeemed from doing that, and redeemed from being parted from their family into a different profession. So, but I think that gave something of I carry on the faith within my family line. That's my job. I am dedicated to God and redeemed out of that to be able to live within my family context, do whatever the profession is of my family.
Sure.
But I have that line of connection to being in the priestly service class of people in the nation. So
that does, and that fits with the whole birthright concept throughout Scripture, because birthright wasn't just about financial or real estate or whatever. It wasn't about what am I going to inherit.
Yeah.
You're also following in the line of faith, and when you're tracing like genealogies in the some of the chapters that put you to sleep. Why are these people included in here?
Yeah.
It's making a point that this is something that's being passed down. Like even into the New Testament, Hebrews chapter 11 is all about tracing how that faith was passed down.
Right.
So the idea that a spiritual leader of a household would take the responsibility to pass on faith. Yeah.
Sure.
For sure. Big deal. Yeah.
And I think the reminder each year with the produce and the animals, there's just a whole culture where everything ties back to gratitude for God being the leader, the guider, the designer of their whole society. I think that's kind of what's going on.
And it's not just about stuff. It's really God wants His people set apart to Him.
Yeah, set apart.
You're the firstborn. You're the head of your family. If you're set apart to God, then everybody else should be, following in line with that. And that's why He says right after, you shall be consecrated to me. Right after. It's not just all the stuff that you're going to give to support, the temple or the tabernacle, but God wants the people to be consecrated to Him. So,
absolutely.
Yeah, and that's really, I think, what's at the bottom of it. Even if you go in like New Testament, right? Jesus is talking about with the Pharisees, like, you guys are tithing every spice in your cabinet, right? In your spice rack, but you've missed the big ones, which are all in the heart, mercy and love, and he lists those kinds of things. And so the idea that God actually wants a cut of our stuff, it's really not about stuff. It's really about our heart.
Yeah.
And now a heart that's consecrated to Him, we're going to give God our stuff. We're going to do that. We're gonna offer to use what we have for God, but it's really the heart that God's concerned with.
Sure.
Yeah. So
He wants our heart.
It's true here. It's true here. It's the whole book.
True all the way through.
Yep.
It's almost like it's a whole.
It's almost like there was one author that wrote all this.
Exactly. All right. I think we've covered it over. If you have questions, then let us know, and we will see you next time on the follow-up podcast.
We'll follow up next time.
We'll follow up with you next time.
Yeah.
Something like
totally.
that. All right. So have a great day.
Awesome.